If someone had told me 3 years ago that I would be in this situation in my old age, I would have laughed in his face. In my 74 years, I, Alfred Hampton, thought I had seen enough in this life not to be surprised by human meanness. Turns out I hadn't. All my life I've worked as a foreman on construction sites in and around Portsmouth. I started out as a simple laborer carrying bricks and mixing mortar, but eventually I moved up. I wouldn't say it was a dream job, but it was a steady income that allowed me to provide for my family. My Elizabeth, of blessed memory, always said I had golden hands and a bright head. Maybe she was exaggerating, but I did have a way with money. While others squandered their earnings in pubs or at the races, I saved. While colleagues took out loans for cars they couldn't afford, I bought what I could pay for. By the time I was 50, I had accumulated a decent sum, which I started investing in real estate. First, a small apartment for rent, then a second, third. I can't say that I became a rich man, but by retirement I had several properties that brought a steady income and a solid bank account. Elizabeth didn't live to see those days. Cancer took her 5 years ago, and since then I had lived alone in our small but cozy house on the outskirts of Portsmouth. Apart from Elizabeth, I had only my daughter Frances, our only child, late and long overdue. Frances grew up a good girl, at least I thought she did. She trained as a nurse, but after the children were born, she worked as a receptionist in a private clinic. The hours were more convenient and the pay was good. Her husband Noel owned a small cleaning company. Nothing fancy, 5 employees, a couple of vans with equipment, but it was enough to live on, I guess. After Elizabeth died, I had more contact with my daughter and her family. More on my own initiative, though. Calling, offering to meet, inviting them to lunch. The grandchildren, Clive and Hazel, now teenagers, were cool to me. When they came to visit, they would stare at their phones. No respect for their elders. No, hello, Grandpa, or how are you, Grandpa? But I didn't take offense. It's that kind of generation. Frances seemed distant after her mother died. I knew it was hard for her. She loved Elizabeth very much. It seemed to me that my presence reminded her of her loss. Maybe that's why we saw each other less and less. Or maybe it was just that she had her own life, her own worries. My son-in-law Noel and I had never had much intimacy. A tall, thin man with a perpetually disgruntled expression on his face. He always treated me with an emphatically polite but cold demeanor. I could sense that he didn't like me very much, but there was no reason for conflict, and we maintained a neutral relationship. At least that's how it seemed to me. In the last year, the loneliness became depressing. I caught myself talking to myself, cooking for one and staring out the window for hours, hoping to see a familiar face. Old friends were leaving one after another, who went to the next world, who went to nursing homes, and at my age I didn't really want to make new ones. More and more often I thought that it would be good to spend the rest of my days with my family, to see my grandchildren grow up, to help my daughter. And then it hit me. I had the means to make a difference. I could buy a big house with enough room for me and Frances's family. They would save money on rent. I know it was expensive, and I wouldn't feel so lonely. That same day I called my daughter and suggested we meet. We sat in a small cafe near her work and I outlined my plan. "Dad, are you serious?" Frances looked surprised, but something else flashed in her eyes. Interest? A calculation? I didn't think much of it at the time. "Absolutely, darling. I've already looked at a few options. There's a great house in Old Portsmouth. 4 bedrooms, large living room, 2 bathrooms, 2-car garage, and a decent lot. You could put in a garden like you've always wanted. But that would be very expensive, wouldn't it?" She fidgeted nervously with her napkin. "I can afford it," I said proudly. "I'll sell my mom's house and I'll add to my savings. There's a couple of apartments I'm renting out. I can sell one. That'll be enough money." "What about Noel? Have you talked to him?" "No. I wanted to talk to you first. If you're up for it, we can tell him together." Frances hesitated to answer. I could see the gears turning in her head. calculating the pros and cons. "You know, that's a very generous offer," she said finally. "Let me talk to Noel, and then we'll go over the details together." 2 days later, they arrived at my house. Noel was unusually lively and friendly. He shook my hand, clapped me on the shoulder, and called me father-in-law, which he had never done before. "This is a terrific idea, Alfred," he said as he walked around my living room. "We are so touched by your concern." We discussed the details, the neighborhood, the approximate cost, when we would move. I suggested that we all share the house equally, but Noel shook his head. "Why go to all that trouble? It's better for one of us so we don't have to deal with taxes and other bureaucracy." "Well, then it's on me," I said. "I'm buying, after all." Francis and Noel looked at each other. "Dad, but you're—" Francis hesitated. "I'm sorry to bring this up, but at your age, if anything happened to you, there'd be red tape, lawsuits. It's better to go straight to us," Noel said. "It'll be easier on everyone. We're family, right?" I hesitated. There was something about their insistence that made me uneasy, but on the other hand, they were right at my age. It was time to think about such things. So I agreed. It took almost 2 months to find a house. Francis, Noel, and I went through probably 24 options before we found something that suited everyone. A large Victorian house in Old Portsmouth, recently renovated but still with historic charm. I fell in love with it at first sight. High ceilings, wood floors, large windows that overlook the sea. It cost more than I had originally planned. I had to sell both of my rental apartments, but it was worth it. The transaction went smoothly. I paid full price and the house was deeded to Francis and Noel. I remember standing out front on the day we got the keys, and I felt incredibly happy. I would finally have a real family again. The move was hectic, as all moves are. The movers, the boxes, the furniture, the arguments about what to put where. I got a room on the first floor, spacious, bright, with its own bathroom. Noel called it Grandpa's Wing and said I'd be more comfortable without climbing the stairs. Caring? Maybe. But I realize now that they had planned from the beginning to keep me out of their part of the house. The first few days were filled with joyful excitement. We had dinners together, discussed plans for settling in. Even the grandchildren seemed to thaw out and occasionally talk to me. I helped with minor repairs. Francis cooked my favorite meals. Noel asked my opinion on the garden. It was idyllic. But after about a week, I noticed a change. First, I stopped being invited to family dinners. Francis brought the food to my room, explaining that the children needed to prepare for their lessons at the table. Then Noel got annoyed when I went out in the garden when the children were there, said I was disturbing their play. And when I offered to help fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen, he said he could do it himself and that I shouldn't mind my own business. I put it down to fatigue from the move, the stress of the change. I tried to be helpful, but unobtrusive. I tried not to take offense at harsh words and cold looks, but every day it became more and more obvious that they were not happy to have me in the house I had bought for them. One evening I overheard Francis and Noel talking. They didn't know that I had returned from my walk and was standing in the hallway. "He's always here," Noel said irritably. "Watching, criticizing, pointing. I feel like I'm under a microscope." "What do you suggest?" Francis's voice sounded tired. "It's his house, too." "No, it's our house. That's what it says in the documents he signed himself." At those words, I rose quietly to my feet, feeling a chill run down my spine. Something told me this was only the beginning of the trouble. 2 weeks after I moved in, Frances announced that she wanted to throw an official housewarming party, invite friends, co-workers, neighbors, so everyone could admire our new home. I supported the idea with enthusiasm. After all, I had something to be proud of. The house really did look luxurious, especially after we bought new furniture and changed the curtains. "Dad, do you mind if we schedule it for next Saturday?" Frances asked at breakfast. Noel just had the day off and the kids didn't have any plans. Of course, darling. Is there anything I can do to help? No need, Noel quickly intervened. We'll organize everything. All you have to do is look nice and smile at the guests. His tone seemed condescending, but I didn't say anything. I'd been trying not to react to such trivialities the last few days, not to exacerbate the already tense atmosphere. Preparations for the housewarming party were in full swing. Francis was ordering food from the catering service. Noel was compiling the guest list and buying alcohol. Even the grandchildren were involved. Hazel was helping to decorate the house and Clive was in charge of the music. I, on the other hand, was carefully kept out of the loop. "It's for your own good, Dad," Francis said when I offered to help. "You need to conserve your strength." I felt unwanted in my own house, but I consoled myself with the thought that things would get better after the housewarming party. On the day of the party, I woke up early, full of anticipation. I put on my best suit, the dark blue one Elizabeth had given me for my 70th birthday. I combed my hair, even spritzed myself with cologne, the French cologne I saved for special occasions. By the time I left my room, the house was buzzing like a beehive. The caterers were setting up tables and arranging hors d'oeuvres. Noel was calling the shots, and Francis was running around with flowers and candles. I tried to offer to help, but Noel just waved me away. "Alfred, you'll only get in the way. You'd better go to your room and we'll call you when it's ready." Frustrated, I went back to my room and spent a few hours there, leafing through an old photo album and remembering the times when my little Francis had looked at me with adoration instead of ill-concealed irritation. The guests started arriving around 6 in the evening. I went out to greet them, standing next to Francis and Noel, shaking hands, smiling, but feeling like an extra at someone else's party. None of the invitees were my friends or acquaintances, all Francis and Noel's co-workers, their friends, the parents of Clive and Hazel's classmates. One of the guests, a man about my age, was interested in the history of the house and asked how long it had been in our family. "Oh, it's a new acquisition," I replied proudly. "Bought it recently so we can all live together." "You bought it?" the man interjected, glancing at Noel, who was standing next to me, visibly tense. "Well, technically it's my wife's and my house," Noel interjected quickly, putting his hand on my shoulder and squeezing it a little harder than necessary. "My father-in-law helped with the down payment and we're very grateful to him. Aren't we, Alfred?" I was embarrassed by the blatant lie, but I didn't want to make a scene in front of my guests, so I just nodded. Noel immediately pulled me aside and hissed, "Don't you dare tell everyone that you bought this house. People will start asking questions and it will embarrass us." "But it's true," I objected. "What embarrassment? I'm proud to be able to provide my family with a house like this." "That's exactly what I'm saying." Noel shook his head. "You're humiliating me in front of my friends, showing that I'm not capable of buying a house for my family on my own." "I didn't mean to." "Just keep your mouth shut." He cut me off and walked away, leaving me alone with a bitter lump in my throat. The evening went on. Everyone was having fun, drinking, eating, dancing. I felt increasingly lonely and unwanted. At some point, I got tired of the noise and fake smiles and decided to go to my room for a while. Sitting on my bed, I reflected on the fact that maybe the idea of cohabitation wasn't such a good idea. Maybe we all need more privacy. Maybe we should sell this house and buy 2 smaller ones, one for me and one for them. There was a knock on the door, and without waiting for an answer, Francis and Noel came in. I could tell by the look on their faces that this was not going to be a pleasant conversation. "Daddy, we need to talk," Francis began, sitting down on the edge of the bed. Noel remained standing with his arms crossed over his chest. "Of course, darling. Is something wrong?" "We've been thinking about it for a while, and we've decided it's best for you to live apart," she blurted out, looking past me. "What?" I couldn't believe my ears. "But we just moved in. I bought this house so we could live together." "The thing is, Alfred," Noel interjected, "your presence is causing certain difficulties for our family." "What kind of hardship?" I felt the blood rush to my face. "I try not to disturb anyone. I sit mostly in my room." "It's not just that." Frances tugged at the sleeve of her blouse, not looking me in the eye. "The kids complain that they don't feel comfortable bringing friends over when you're always watching them. And Noel and I can't relax, knowing that you could come out at any moment and, you know." "No, I don't!" I was getting angry. "This is my house. I paid my money for it. Technically," Noel emphasized the word, "it's Frances and mine. That's what it says on the deed you signed. But that was a formality. We had an agreement." "We're grateful for your gift," Noel interrupted me, his voice hardening. "But this is our house now and we decide who lives in it." I looked at my daughter, expecting her to stand up for me, to say something in my defense. But Frances only lowered her eyes guiltily and said quietly, "I'm sorry, Daddy. We think you'd be better off in a nursing home. They'll take better care of you there than we can." "A nursing home?" I couldn't believe my ears. "You're kicking me into a nursing home from the house I bought?" "Don't be so dramatic, Alfred," Noel said with a wince. "It's not that bad there, and it's not forever. Maybe in time." "Out!" I jumped up from the bed, my hands trembling with anger and resentment. "Get out of my room, now!" They looked at each other, and something resembling fear flashed across their faces. But then Noel straightened up and said icily, "You don't understand the situation, Alfred. This is no longer your room. This is our home, and we're asking you to leave it. Tonight." "Tonight?" I was stunned. "But we have guests." "That's exactly why," Noel nodded. "Everyone's busy, so no one will notice you're gone, and there won't be awkward questions. You can't do this." I felt my throat tighten and my eyes start to sting. "Frances, say something. I'm your father." My daughter got up and walked to the door where Noel was standing. "Daddy, please don't make a scene. We've already made up our minds. Pull yourself together and leave nicely." "Amicably?" I laughed bitterly. "In your mind, amicably means kicking your 74-year-old father out on the street during a party at the house he bought." "You said you bought it for us." Frances shrugged, and there wasn't a trace of remorse in her voice. "Well, thank you for the house. We love it. But we don't need you anymore." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I looked at my daughter, the woman I'd raised with love, the woman I'd always been willing to give my last for, and I didn't recognize her. Before me stood a stranger, a cold man with the face of my Frances. "I'll give you an hour," Noel said, glancing at his watch. "Then I'll be back to check on the packing. And don't get hysterical in front of the guests. It'll only make things worse." They went out, leaving me alone in a room that had been mine in the morning but was now suddenly someone else's. I sat stunned by the betrayal, unable to believe what was happening. Was it really my daughter who had just told me she didn't need me? Were they really kicking me out of my own home? I tried to gather my thoughts. Maybe this was some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe they just had too much to drink at the party. But deep down, I knew it was serious. They'd been planning this for a long time, from the very beginning, maybe even before I offered to buy the house. They were just waiting for the right moment. Mechanically, I began to put things into the suitcase I hadn't yet had time to fully unpack since moving in. Clothes, toiletries, medications, photo albums. What else? I looked around the room, trying to decide what to take with me and what to leave behind. The realization that I had to fit my entire life into one suitcase was unbearable. When I was almost done packing, the door opened without a knock. Clive and Hazel, my grandchildren, stood on the doorstep. I could tell by their grins that they knew what was going on. "Grandpa's packing?" Hazel giggled, chewing gum defiantly. "Just don't forget your pills and diapers. And don't think about bringing anything from home," Clive added, crossing his arms across his chest like his father. "Mom said you could only take your personal things." I looked at them and didn't recognize them. When had these children I loved so much turned into such callous, cruel people? Who taught them to treat old people like that? "Does your mother know you're here?" I asked, trying to maintain my dignity. "Why? Are you going to complain?" Clive grinned. "She's busy with guests. We thought we'd check to see if you were carrying anything extra. Get out now." My voice shook with resentment and anger. I'm not helpless enough to tolerate such an attitude from my own grandchildren. "Wow, Grandpa's mad." Hazel made a frightened face and then laughed. "All right, we'll go. Just hurry up. Daddy said he called you a cab. It'll be here in 15 minutes. They left, leaving the door open, and I could hear them laughing in the hallway. Noel kept his word. He showed up at the door exactly an hour later. "Are you ready?" he asked in a businesslike tone, as if I were going on vacation, not being driven out of my own home. "And if I'm not?" I tried to find some sympathy in his eyes, but all I saw was cold calculation. "Then I'll have to ask some of the guests to help you." "Speed up the process," he smiled, but the smile didn't touch his eyes. "I'm sure you don't want public humiliation." I zipped up my suitcase in silence. It was better to leave with some dignity than to be thrown out in front of strangers. "The cab's waiting." Noel glanced at his watch. "I'll walk you to the door." "And Frances?" I was still hoping my daughter would come to her senses, that this was some cruel misunderstanding. "She's busy with her guests," Noel said, "and she shouldn't be disturbed. She's upset enough about this situation." I wanted to say something else, but I realized it was useless. I grabbed my suitcase and followed Noel. As I passed the living room where the guests were having fun, I saw Frances. She was laughing at someone's joke, holding a glass of champagne in her hand. Our eyes met, and for a moment her smile faded, but then she turned away and continued the conversation as if she hadn't noticed me. That was the last straw. I felt something inside me break completely. My daughter, my flesh and blood, hadn't just kicked me out of the house. She hadn't even found the strength to say goodbye. Noel opened the front door and I stepped out into the cool evening. There was indeed a cab at the curb. "Where can I take you?" the driver asked as I got into the back seat. I realized I didn't know the answer to that question. I didn't have a home anymore. "Any hotel nearby?" I said, feeling the traitorous tears come to my eyes. The cab started and I looked back at the house I'd thought I owned that morning. Through the big windows I could see the party. People were dancing, laughing, raising their glasses. None of them had even noticed that the owner of the house, the one who had paid for all this splendor, had just been banished as an unwanted thing. In that moment I swore to myself that I would never let them use me again. Never again would I reach out to those who had so ruthlessly pushed me away, even if they begged, even if their lives depended on it. The Harbor View Hotel didn't live up to its name. My window overlooked not the harbor, but the brick wall of the building next door. A cramped room with a squashed bed, a dim lamp, and a noisy air conditioner became my home for the first 3 days of my exile. I hardly went out, ate chips and chocolate from the vending machine in the hallway, and didn't answer the phone. I didn't get many calls, though. It wasn't until the 4th day that I forced myself to go out into the city and start looking for more permanent accommodation. Portsmouth, which had always been home and cozy to me, now seemed alien and hostile. I wandered the streets, looking at apartment ads and feeling like a refugee in my own city. By evening, I managed to find a small apartment in an old house on the outskirts. 1 room, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom with a dripping faucet. The landlord, recognizing that I was a pensioner, immediately demanded 3 months' rent in advance. I paid, although it was a serious blow to my remaining savings. I spent the first night in my new home sitting on the windowsill and looking at the deserted street. I couldn't sleep. My mind was reeling with fragments of phrases Frances and Noel had said. "We don't need you anymore. Thank you for the house. You'll be better off in a nursing home." How could she? How did my little girl, the one I carried in my arms, The one I read bedtime stories to, the one I was willing to give up everything for, turned into this callous, calculating creature. When did it happen? And most importantly, why didn't I notice? I spent the next days trying to establish some semblance of normal life. I bought dishes, linens, a few books at a second-hand bookstore. I moved the things that didn't fit in my suitcase that fateful night out of the storage room. Found the nearest supermarket and pharmacy. Life was slowly getting back on track, but there was not a shred of joy in it. Frances didn't call. I didn't expect her to be honest. Pride wouldn't let me make the first move, though at times, especially at night, I desperately wanted to hear her voice, to be sure it was all some horrible mistake. But deep down inside I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was their true face, which they no longer felt they had to hide. One morning, a week or two after moving in, I went to the park. It was early fall. The leaves were just beginning to turn yellow and the sun was still warming the summer sun. I was sitting on a bench watching the children playing in the playground and suddenly I heard a familiar voice. Alfred. Alfred Hampton. I don't believe it. I turned around and saw Walter Pierce, my old friend and colleague whom I hadn't seen in 3 years, since Elizabeth's funeral. Walter had changed little, the same stumpy figure, gray stubble on his chin and lively eyes under his bushy eyebrows. Walter! I felt something warm stirring in my chest. What are you doing here? I live nearby, walking my arthritis, he grinned, sitting down next to me. And how are you? I haven't seen you in a long time. I wanted to say something neutral, the usual okay or slow, but instead I felt my throat tighten and tears well up in my eyes. And to my own horror, I burst into tears right there on the park bench like a little kid. Walter didn't ask any questions. He just sat there with his hand on my shoulder while I choked with words and tears and told him the whole story, from the idea of buying the house to the shameful banishment on housewarming day. Those bastards, was all he said when I was done. I'm sorry, Alfred, I know it's your daughter, but this is out of line. It's my own fault, I shook my head. I believe they wanted me, not my money. I gave them everything. It wasn't your fault that you loved your daughter and wanted to help her, Walter argued. It's their fault for taking advantage. We sat in the park until evening. Walter told me he'd retired 2 years ago, widowed about the same time I had, and now spent his days with the same old men at the local bridge club. Why are you sulking all alone? He asked me. Come to our club. We'll sit and play cards and talk. It's better than looking at the walls at home. I wanted to refuse. I had no time for fun, but something in his sincere participation touched me, and I agreed. The bridge club turned out to be a small room in the local leisure center for pensioners. 5 tables, worn cards, a kettle of boiling water, and a group of old men like me. They accepted me without question, as if I had always been part of their company. And gradually, day by day, I began to thaw. I began to notice again that the sun was shining, that the leaves were turning yellow, that life went on in spite of everything. Walter became my frequent visitor and I became his. We reminisced about our youth, discussed the news, and sometimes went to the pub for a pint. Gradually, I told him all the details of my story, including the financial side. Wait a minute. Walter frowned one day when I mentioned the name of the company through which I'd bought the house. Haven Estates? I read something about them in the paper the other day. Something bad. He promised to get the details and came to me the next day with the paper in his hand. Here, look. He unfolded the paper and jabbed his finger at a small article. Haven Estates is under investigation for fraudulent real estate schemes. I read the article, and I got a chill inside. The company through which I was buying the house was accused of a series of scams. They sold properties they didn't have full rights to, forged documents, and concealed information about legal problems with the property. Do you think I'm also... I couldn't say the word scammed. That would be too much. Cheated by his daughter, cheated by realtors, it's Too much for one old man. We should check it out, Walter said firmly. I got a nephew who's a lawyer. He's a good guy. He knows his stuff. Why don't I talk to him? The next day we met Edwin, Walter's nephew. A young man in his 30s in a strict suit, and with an attentive eye he listened to my story, asked a few clarifying questions, and asked to see all the documents related to the purchase of the house. I will need to make inquiries, check the title registration, the history of the property, he said, looking through the papers. It will take some time. But, Mr. Hampton, from what I'm seeing so far, you could be in real trouble. This company used a typical scheme. They sold real estate that was pledged to banks or encumbered. What does that mean for me? I asked, feeling my insides clench with the anticipation of more trouble. If it is confirmed that the sale was illegal, the contract of sale may be recognized as invalid. In this case, you have the right to demand a refund from the seller. But there is a problem. The company has already declared bankruptcy, and many victims are unlikely to receive compensation in full. And the house? What will happen to the house? If it turns out that the current owners did not consent to the sale, or that there is an encumbrance on the house that was not disclosed in the transaction, the house could be seized in favor of the rightful owners or creditors. I sat stunned by this information. So not only was I losing money, but Francis and Noel could lose the house. Strangely, the thought didn't bring the expected satisfaction, only bitterness and fatigue. I'll take the case, Edwin said, gathering the papers. But I must warn you, the process may be long and not necessarily end in your favor. I spent the next few days in anxious anticipation. Edwin called several times informing me about the progress of the investigation, but there were no concrete results. I tried to distract myself by going to the club, walking with Walter, even taking a computer course at the local library. But my thoughts kept returning to home and my daughter's betrayal. And then, exactly 7 days after my meeting with Edwin, something happened that I was both expecting and dreading. My phone rang and Francis's name popped up on the screen. I stared at the screen for a long moment, hesitant to answer. Part of me wanted to throw the phone at the wall, but the other part, the part that still remembered the little girl with the pigtails who called me the best daddy ever, made me press the answer button. Daddy! Francis's voice sounded scared and broken, like she was crying. Daddy, are you there? Yes, I answered dryly, trying not to let my voice give away the storm of emotion inside. Daddy, we're in trouble, she sobbed. We're being evicted from the house. Some people with documents came. They say that the house was sold illegally, that the real owners demand to vacate the premises. Daddy, we don't know what to do. I was silent, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. So Edwin was right. The house had indeed been sold illegally. Daddy, are you listening? Francis's voice had a note of irritation in it. We've been given 3 days to evict. 3 days. Where are we going to go with the kids? What does Noel say? I asked, surprised at my own calmness. He's in a panic. He says it's some kind of mistake that he's going to sue, but we don't have money for a good lawyer. Dad, you have to help us. Have to. That word hit me like a slap in the face. After everything they've done, she says I owe them something? What exactly can I do to help, Francis? I asked, and my voice sounded like a stranger's. Money, of course. There was something demanding in her tone. We need to rent a place, hire a lawyer, and also, maybe you could talk to these people. You know about real estate, you have connections. I listened to her and I couldn't believe my ears. Not a word of apology, not a hint of remorse. Just demands and the expectation that I would, as always, come to the rescue. Francis, I said slowly, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me. Do you remember what you said to me on housewarming day? What? She seemed confused. What did you mean? You said, thanks for the house, but we don't need you anymore. Remember? Daddy, this is no time for old grudges. She sounded hysterical. "We're in the middle of a disaster." "You're having a disaster?" I felt something breaking inside of me. "And when you kicked me out of the house I bought with my own money, wasn't that a disaster? When I slept in a cheap hotel, not knowing where to go, wasn't that a disaster?" "Dad, please." "No, Francis. Now you listen to me," I said quietly but firmly. "I bought you the house because I loved you. I wanted to be near my family. And you just used me. You took what you wanted and then you threw it away like it was nothing." "We were wrong," she said hastily. "We're sorry. We really are. But we need your help now. We're a family, Daddy." "Family?" I grinned bitterly. "No, Francis. A family doesn't do what you did. A family doesn't kick Dad out of the house on housewarming day. A family doesn't say, 'We don't need you anymore.'" "What are you saying?" Her voice shook. "What I'm saying," I said slowly and clearly, "is that you taught me a valuable lesson, and I've learned it. You taught me that family is an empty word when it comes to money and profit. You taught me that you can't trust even the people closest to you. And you know what? I'm grateful for that lesson. It opened my eyes." "Dad, you can't say that. We're desperate. Where are we supposed to go with the kids?" "Where was I supposed to go when you kicked me out the door?" I asked. "Had you thought about that?" There was silence in the receiver, and then I heard Noel's muffled voice. "Give me the phone." "Alfred." His voice sounded strained. "Look, I realize you're upset and we were wrong, but this is no time for hard feelings. We have serious problems and we need your help." "Noel," I said calmly, "you told me that the house is yours now and you don't need me anymore. Well, the house is no longer yours and you still don't need me. You still don't need me. You take care of your own problems." "You can't do this to us," he screamed. "What about the children? They're your grandchildren." "My grandchildren?" I remembered Clive and Hazel's taunts when I was packing. "No, Noel, they're your children. You raised them. You're responsible for them." "Is that your final word?" I could hear the fury in his voice. "Yes," I said firmly. "This is my last word." I pressed the disconnect button and sat for a while staring at the faded screen of the phone. Strangely, I felt no gloating or satisfaction, only fatigue and emptiness. The phone rang again. "Francis." I didn't answer it. Then it rang again, and again. After the fifth ring, I muted it and put the phone on the table. I went to the window and stared out at the street for a long time, lit by the evening lights. Somewhere out there, in the big house I'd bought with my own money, my daughter and her family were packing up, preparing to move out. Was I supposed to feel pity? I probably should have, but I didn't. Perhaps they were right to kick me out. Perhaps I really had become a callous old man, incapable of empathy. Or maybe they were the ones who'd made me that way. The phone on the desk vibrated again. A message came in. I didn't bother to read it. Whatever it was, pleas, threats, accusations, I knew I wouldn't change my mind. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from illusions, from obligations, from false hopes. They no longer had power over me. I made tea, turned on the radio, and sat in the old armchair listening to jazz. Tomorrow I'd have to call Edwin, get the details of the house situation. Maybe there's a chance of getting at least some of the money back. And if not, well, I'd been through worse. The phone vibrated again. This time it was Walter. I answered it. "Alfred, how are you? I just heard the news about Haven Estates. They've started the process of evicting everyone who bought distressed properties from them." "I know," I said. "Francis just called. Asked for help." "I?" Walter sounded worried. I said no. There was a pause, and I waited for a judgment, an exhortation, a reminder that blood was not water. But instead, Walter simply said, "I understand. Do you want me to come over? Sit and have a drink?" "Come," I said, feeling the tension of the last few hours begin to ease. "Just don't talk to me about family values. I'm allergic to the subject." "All right," Walter grinned. I'll be there in 20 minutes. And, Alfred, you did the right thing. You can't let people take advantage of you, even if they are your family. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. The phone vibrated again. Another message from Francis. I knew I'd have to read them all sooner or later, but not today. Today, I just wanted to sit in silence, drinking tea and listening to jazz, not thinking about betrayal and pain. Walter didn't stay up late. At our age, an early bedtime is no longer a bliss, but a necessity. After he left, I sat in the chair for a while, thinking about Francis's call and my reaction. Had I been too harsh? Was it resentment rather than common sense that spoke to me? But once I thought back to the night I'd been kicked out of my own home, the doubts receded. They had shown no mercy when I was in trouble. Why should I show mercy when they were in trouble? I decided to read Francis's messages after all. There were 5 of them. Daddy, please call me back. It's very important. We're really desperate. We have nowhere to go. Noel says she's going to sue the sellers, but that's a long time. We need help now. Dad, the kids are asking why Grandpa won't help us. What should I tell them? And last, sent past midnight. If you won't talk to me, at least tell me where you live. We could come over, talk in person. I grinned. Know where I lived? To what? To show up uninvited and pity me in person? Or to have an alternate airfield in case of eviction? No, that's not going to happen. In the morning, the phone woke me up with another call from Francis. I didn't answer again. Then Edwin, Walter's nephew, called and suggested we meet. He had news about my case. We met at a small cafe not far from my apartment. Edwin looked serious, but not gloomy, which I considered a good sign. I've studied all the documents and made inquiries, he said as we sat down at a table in the corner. The situation is difficult, but not hopeless. Tell me straight, I asked. What about the house and what about my money? The house was sold illegally. Edwin spread some papers on the table. Haven Estates didn't have full rights to the property. The house was mortgaged to the bank on the previous owner's mortgage, which had not been fully repaid. In addition, there were additional encumbrances on the house that you were not told about when you purchased it. So what now? The bank has started foreclosure proceedings. Your daughter and son-in-law, as the current deeded owners, received an eviction notice. They've been given a certain amount of time to vacate the premises. And my money? That's where it gets interesting, Edwin said, revitalized. Since you were deceived when you bought the property, you were not informed about the significant encumbrances on the property. You have the right to demand a refund from the seller, that is from Haven Estates. But they're bankrupt, I reminded him. Technically, yes. But I dug deeper and found that the directors of the company had withdrawn substantial funds before declaring bankruptcy. That's fraud. The police are now looking into it, and there's a good chance the assets will be seized and used to compensate the victims. How good? Good enough to start legal action. Edwin held out another piece of paper to me. I've prepared a statement of claim on your behalf. If you sign it, we can file it today. I read the document carefully. Everything was well written and clear, even to me, who was far from legal subtleties. What about Francis and Noel? I asked, raising my eyes from the paper. Can they claim compensation too? Edwin shook his head. That's just it, no. You're the buyer on the deed, but they're the owners. You can claim your money back as a victim of fraud. They can only contest the eviction, but the chances of success are minimal, given that the bank has the full right to foreclose. So I could get my money back and they would be left with nothing? I clarified, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Theoretically, yes, Edwin nodded. But you have to realize that the process of getting your money back can be long, and it's not certain that we'll be able to recover the full amount. I signed the statement of claim and a few other documents that Edwin had prepared. We agreed that he would keep me informed of developments, and we parted ways. On the way home, I reflected on what I had learned. The strange thing was that I should have felt gloating, or at least satisfied that justice had been done. Francis and Noel, who had kicked me out of the house I'd bought, were now on the street themselves. I might get my money back and they would get nothing. The perfect revenge I'd never dreamed of. But instead of gloating, all I felt was tired and empty. It was as if the whole story had sucked all the emotion out of me, leaving only dead indifference. Perhaps that was why, when there was a knock at the door that evening, I opened it without even asking who it was. Frances stood on the threshold. She looked haggard, the circles under her eyes, her pale face, her hair disheveled. She was holding a small bag. "Daddy," she breathed out, visibly relieved. "Thank God I found you." "How did you get my address?" I asked, making no attempt to invite her in. "The neighbors from your old house. They saw you coming out of here." She stepped forward. "Can I come in? We need to talk." I reluctantly stepped back, letting her into the apartment. Frances looked around, something akin to pity flashing across her face. "Do you live here?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. It's so miserable," I finished for her. "Yeah, it's not a Victorian mansion in an upscale neighborhood, but it's got a roof over its head, thank you very much." Frances was embarrassed and lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean that." "It doesn't matter," I pointed to the only chair. "Sit down. No tea. I wasn't expecting company." She sat down, still clutching the bag in her hands as if she were afraid to part with it. "Papa, I realize you're angry with us," she began. "And you have a right to be. What we did was awful. I don't know what came over us. I guess we just, gave in to greed. Big house, upscale neighborhood. We felt like we were different people, and we thought we could start a new life. Without no past." "And I was part of that past," I said. "Yes," she lowered her head. "It's unforgivable, I know, but we're in a desperate situation right now. We're being evicted the day after tomorrow. We don't have the money to rent a new place. Noel's lost some important clients. Things aren't going well at the company. We don't know where to go. And you came to me," I crossed my arms over my chest. "The man you kicked out of his own house. Don't you find that ironic?" "I do," she said quietly, "but we don't have a choice. I'm not asking for me, Dad. I'm asking for the children. They don't have a place to live." I looked at my daughter and tried to see her as the little girl I once loved most in the world. But all I saw was a strange woman who came not to apologize but to ask for help. Again. "What exactly do you want from me, Frances? We could, stay with you for a while." She looked around the small room. "I realize it's cramped, but it's only temporary, until we find another place to live." "All four of us?" I grinned. "In a studio apartment?" "Noel could stay with his brother," she said hurriedly. "And me and the kids, well, we'll manage somehow. It won't take long, I promise." "And if I say no?" I asked, watching her reaction. Frances turned even paler. "Daddy, please don't say no. We're really sorry for what we did. It was horrible, unforgivable. But don't punish the children for our mistakes." "Children?" I remembered Clive and Hazel laughing at me when I was packing. The same ones who made fun of me when you kicked me out of the house. They're old enough to know what they're doing, and old enough to take responsibility for their actions. "They were wrong," Frances lowered her head, "but they were just imitating Noel and me. It's our fault. We set a bad example for them." I stayed silent, staring at the woman in front of me. She did look remorseful, or just desperate. It's hard to say, probably both. "I talked to my lawyer today," I said, changing the subject. "He thinks I have a good chance of recovering the money I spent on the house." "Really?" Frances's eyes lit up with hope. "Then we can—" "Not a we, Frances," I shook my head. I can get my money back because I was duped into buying it. And you and Noel, as formal owners of the house, have no right to compensation. You'll just be evicted." "But that's not fair," she exclaimed. "The house was bought with your money, but for us." Was it fair to kick me out of this house? I parried. Was it fair to say you didn't need me anymore after I gave you everything I had? Frances was silent, her head down. You know, I continued after a pause, I've been thinking about a lot of things these weeks, and I have come to the conclusion that you have taught me a very valuable lesson. You've shown me that in this world everyone has to take care of himself first, that family ties mean nothing when it comes to profit, that you can't trust even the closest of people, and I'm grateful for that lesson. Daddy, we were wrong, Frances said quietly. We gave in to temptation, but that doesn't mean the whole world is like that. Please don't become cynical because of our mistake. Cynical? I shook my head. No, Frances. I've just become a realist. And as a realist, I see that you came to me not because you're remorseful, but because you have nowhere else to go. Not because you love me, but because you need my help. And you know what? I'm not buying it anymore. What are you saying? There's fear in her voice. I'm saying I won't let you live in my place, I replied calmly. I won't give you money for rent. I won't solve your problems. You're the ones who created this situation, and you're the ones who have to deal with it. Daddy, you can't do this. Tears welled up in her eyes. We're your family. Family? I grinned bitterly. No, Frances. You stopped being my family the moment you kicked me out the door. Family doesn't do what you did. We were wrong. She was practically screaming. People make mistakes. Haven't you ever made a mistake? Of course I've made mistakes, I nodded. My biggest mistake was letting you guys do too much forgiveness, giving too much without asking for anything in return. But I won't make that mistake again. Frances looked at me with horror as if she saw not her father but a monster. You've changed, she whispered. Yes, I agreed. I have changed. You've changed me. And you know what? I like this new version of me, the one that doesn't let herself be used, the one that values herself more than her ungrateful relatives. So what do? There was desperation in her voice. The same thing I did when you kicked me out, I shrugged. Find a place to live, save money, work more, make it on our own. We don't even have money for a down payment on rent. I didn't have any when I moved out of the hotel, I reminded him. But I made it, and so will you. Noel has a company. You have a job. You have 2 almost grown children who can work part-time. You're not going to end up on the street. You're cruel. Frances shook her head. I don't recognize you. No, Frances. I looked her straight in the eye. You were cruel when you kicked the old man out of his own house, when you told him he was no longer needed, when you made him pack up his things to the taunts of his own grandchildren. I'm just being fair. I'm giving you what you deserve, no more, no less. She stood up, clutching the bag so tight her knuckles turned white. So this is your last word? You won't help us? I won't, I said firmly. And you can tell Noel that if he tries to come in here and threaten me like he did last time, I'll call the police. I'm not a helpless old man who can be intimidated anymore. Frances headed for the door but stopped on the threshold and turned around. You know, Dad, I understand your resentment, I really do. But what you're doing right now is revenge, and revenge never brings relief. It only eats away at the soul. Thanks for the moral lesson, I grinned. I wish you'd remembered it when you kicked me out of the house. She didn't say anything, but shut the door quietly behind her. I sat in the chair, staring at the closed door, trying to sort out my feelings. I expected to feel satisfaction or even triumph when I turned Frances down. But instead I felt only emptiness and a strange tugging pain somewhere in my chest. Maybe she was right. Perhaps this really was revenge, not justice. But wasn't I entitled to that revenge, after all they had done? I remembered Frances's face as she left. Despair, fear, disappointment, and something else, realization. The realization that she had truly lost her father the day she kicked me out of the house. Not physically, emotionally. She killed something important in me, something that made me her father. And today, she finally realized it. The next morning, I got a call from Edwin. He said that the statement of claim had been accepted and the case would be expedited, given the many people affected. He also said that the police had arrested the directors of Haven Estates and frozen their accounts, increasing the chances of recovering the money. What about the house? I asked. Had the eviction already started? Yes, Edwin confirmed. The bank had started the procedure. All the current tenants have been given a certain period of time to vacate the premises. In the case of your daughter and son-in-law, it's, let me see, the day after tomorrow. And what happens if they don't move out? Forced eviction with the help of bailiffs, Edwin replied. But I wouldn't worry about that. It's not your problem anymore, Mr. Hampton. Yes, I said, feeling a strange heaviness in my chest. Not my problem. After my conversation with Edwin, I sat at the window for a long time looking out at the street and thinking. The rain drummed on the glass, blurring the outlines of passers-by going about their business under umbrellas. Somewhere among them was Francis, perhaps desperately looking for a new place to live, or Noel, trying to find the money for a down payment on rent, or Clive and Hazel, facing real problems for the first time in their lives. I remembered wandering the streets myself after eviction, confused and depressed, not knowing where to go. I remembered the humiliation, the pain, the feeling of helplessness. Did I wish the same for my own daughter, my own grandchildren? But then I remembered other things. Noel's cold eyes, Clive and Hazel's taunts, Francis's indifference that evening, their cruelty, their betrayal. And I realized I just couldn't open my heart to them again, couldn't risk being betrayed again. Maybe Francis was right, and revenge wouldn't bring me relief. But knowing that they got what they deserved, that there was justice after all, that gave me some comfort. Small, bitter, but comfort. The phone rang again. This time it was Walter. Hello, old boy. His voice sounded cheerful. How are you? Edwin said things were moving along. Yeah, I guess so, I answered. Frances came by yesterday. Wow, how did it go? I refused to help her, I said, expecting judgment. But Walter just chuckled. Good for you. You don't want to be the one to stick your neck out. They'd made their choice, and now they had to deal with the consequences. Yeah, I guess so, I said uncertainly. What do you mean? I guess so. Walter sounded surprised. Don't tell me you doubt it. After everything they've done to you? I don't know, Walter, I sighed. It's not that simple. She's my daughter after all. The daughter who threw you out on the street, he reminded me. Look, Alfred, you're a good man, too good. And they took advantage of that. Don't let them get on your back again. They don't deserve your help. You're probably right, I said, but the voice inside me kept questioning it. After talking to Walter, I decided to take a walk. The rain had stopped, and the streets glistened in the sunlight that was breaking through the clouds. I didn't think much about my route, and before I knew it, I was near the house I'd once bought for Frances and her family. I stopped on the opposite side of the street, looking at the Victorian mansion that was supposed to be my last home, the place where I would spend the rest of my days surrounded by my family. Now it was just a beautiful house with bitter memories associated with it. A car with a bank logo was parked at the entrance. Two men in suits were talking about something with Noel, who looked drained and aged. Frances was nowhere to be seen, nor were the children. Perhaps they had already left, or maybe they were packing up inside. I watched the scene and felt a strange calmness, not gloating, not contentment, but exactly calm, as if some cycle had ended and now it was okay to move on. Turning around, I walked away. I had an appointment with Edwin to discuss the details of the upcoming trial. In the evening, Walter and I were going to the pub. There was a jazz quartet playing tonight. Life went on. My life. Without Frances, without Noel, without grandchildren. A life in which I would no longer allow myself to be used or betrayed by anyone. And if that required becoming a little tougher, a little more cynical, Well, that was a price I was willing to pay for my peace of mind and dignity. The lawsuit against Haven Estates began 2 months after that memorable conversation with Francis. All the while, I was living my new life, going to the bridge club, hanging out with Walter, even signing up for a watercolor painting class at the local senior center. I never thought I had any artistic ability in me before, but it turned out that painting was calming and helped organize my thoughts. I knew very little about Frances and her family. Walter had mentioned seeing them at the supermarket once. They looked gaunt and haggard. He said they had rented a small apartment in a not-so-wealthy part of town. I listened to this information without much emotion. Something inside me finally closed in on them, as if a heavy door had slammed shut. The trial was held in the Portsmouth City Courthouse, a massive Victorian structure with columns and a wide staircase. I was only one of many victims, though I had lost perhaps the most, almost all of my life savings. Edwin prepared me for the trial, explaining that I would need to testify about how the transaction had gone down, whether I was aware of title issues, whether I had been warned of the risks. I was nervous before speaking, but when it was my turn and I stood before the judge, I found myself speaking clearly and confidently. Perhaps age and life experience were finally starting to take their toll. I had seen only a glimpse of the defendants themselves, the directors of Haven Estates. 3 men in expensive suits with groomed faces and confident smiles, which, however, faded by the end of the first day of the trial, when the prosecutor presented evidence of their fraudulent scheme. The trial lasted a week. Every day I went to court, sat on the witness bench, and listened to the stories of other victims. An elderly couple who had lost money they had set aside for medical treatment. A young family who had invested their inheritance in a house. An entrepreneur who had invested the proceeds from the sale of his business in real estate. Everyone had their own tragedy, their own pain, but the common denominator, they trusted the fraudsters and lost everything. On the 7th day, the court ruled. The directors of Haven Estates were found guilty of fraud and sentenced to prison terms. Their personal assets were seized and were to go towards compensating the victims. "It's a victory, Mr. Hampton," Edwin said as we left the courthouse. "Full compensation is unlikely, of course, but you should get a significant portion of your funds back." "How long will that take?" I asked. "It's hard to say for sure," he shrugged. "The seized assets will have to be realized. Then the funds will have to be distributed among the victims in proportion to their losses. It could take a month. It could take 6 months." "I see," I nodded. "Well, I'll wait." I had to wait for 3 months. All this time I continued to live in my small rented apartment, gradually getting used to the new reality. The strange thing was that I began to find pleasure in simple things I hadn't noticed before. In morning coffee on the tiny balcony, in conversations with neighbors, in long walks along the waterfront with Walter. Life without family obligations, without having to conform to anyone else's expectations, was surprisingly free and easy. One such day, as Walter and I were returning from a walk, I noticed a familiar figure in the driveway of my house. Noel. He was standing there, shuffling from foot to foot, clearly nervous. When he saw us, he straightened up and put a smile on his face. "Alfred, what a meeting! Not so coincidental, I suppose," I said dryly. "You were obviously expecting me." "Yes, I was," he stammered, glancing at Walter. "I wanted to talk to you. Alone, if I may." "This is my friend Walter," I gestured toward my companion. "I have no secrets from him. Talk in front of him or don't talk at all." Noel was clearly unhappy, but he had no choice. "All right," he sighed. "I've come to apologize for what we did to you. It was wrong." "Wrong?" I chuckled. Interesting choice of word. I'd say mean, cruel, inhumane. But wrong works too if that's what you're comfortable with. Noel blushed but continued. "Francis and I thought a lot about it. We've realized how horribly we've done to you. And we want to make it right. Start over." "Why?" I asked you directly. Why would you do that? You're our family, he said with his hands as if that explained everything. Francis misses you. So do the kids. We want to reconnect. You do? I looked him straight in the eye. Or maybe it's because you heard about the court order, that I was about to be compensated. Noel looked away, and that was more eloquent than any answer. I thought you'd be happy to reconnect with your family, he murmured. After everything that's happened. After you kicked me out of my own house. After you told me you didn't need me anymore. After you made me pack my bags to the taunts of your own grandchildren. I shook my head. No, Noel, I'm not happy, and I won't be, ever. People make mistakes. He tried to make his voice sound convincing. We all deserve a second chance. You didn't come for a second chance. I looked at him without anger, but without pity. You came for my money, again. That's not true. He tried to act outraged, but it was unconvincing. How are you doing, Noel? I asked, changing the subject. How's the business? How's the new place? He was visibly shrinking. Not great, to be honest. Lost some big clients, had to lay off some employees, and the apartment. Well, it's not what we're used to, of course. I see, I nodded. And you've decided that I'm your ticket back to a comfortable life? That I'm going to open my wallet again and save you? We're a family, he repeated stubbornly. A family is supposed to support each other in times of need. Family? I laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. No, Noel. You stopped being my family the moment you kicked me out the door. That's not what family does. What should I tell Francis? He asked after a pause. Nothing, I shrugged. Or the truth. That I don't believe what you say anymore. That I want nothing to do with you. That I'd learned a valuable lesson from you, that I should think of myself first. You can't just cut us out of your life. I could hear the desperation in his voice. Frances is your daughter. Clive and Hazel are your grandchildren. I can, I said calmly, and I already have. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go. I walked around him and headed for the driveway. Walter followed me, giving Noel a look of blatant contempt. You're going to regret this, Noel shouted after me. When you're alone in your old age, you'll remember this conversation. I turned around. I'm already alone, Noel, and you know what? That's not a bad thing. At least I know for sure there are no traitors around me. With those words, I walked into the entryway, leaving him standing outside. You're hard on him, Walter said as we walked up the stairs. What else could it be? I shrugged. He didn't come to make peace. He came for the money. Do you think Frances will come too? She will, I nodded. As soon as she realizes that Noel didn't work through her. She's always been more stubborn and persistent than him. I was right. 3 days after Noel's visit, I met Frances outside the bank. She was obviously waiting for me, and when I left the building, she came running toward me. Daddy. She tried to hug me, but I pulled away. I'm so happy to see you. Really? I looked at her questioningly. Is that why you waited for me at the bank instead of coming home? I didn't know if you would accept me. She lowered her eyes. After you spoke to Noel. So he did tell you about our conversation, I said, and you decided to try your luck on your own? Dad, please, she touched my arm. Let's just talk. Somewhere in a cafe, quietly. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to just leave, but the other part of me, the part that still remembered the little girl with the pigtails, demanded to listen. Okay, I finally said. But just a conversation, nothing more. We went into a small cafe nearby and sat at a table by the window. Frances ordered tea, and I ordered coffee. We sat in silence for a while, looking at each other. She looked tired and gaunt, with shadows under her eyes and new wrinkles at the corners of her mouth. How are you? She finally asked. I'm fine, I said briefly. And you? Honestly? Not really, she sighed. Since the eviction, everything's been a mess. Noel's losing clients. I'm working part-time to make ends meet. Clive dropped out of school, got involved with some company. Hazel's withdrawn, barely speaks. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and it wasn't a lie. I was sorry. Not for them specifically, but for the situation as a whole. Sorry that things had turned out this way. Sorry that we're sitting here like strangers right now. Dad, I know you're angry with us, Frances looked at me pleadingly, and you have every right to be. What we did was awful. It's unforgivable. But is there no going back? Can't we make it right? What exactly do you want to fix, Frances? I asked you bluntly. Your financial situation or our relationship? Both, she answered honestly, and I was grateful if only for that honesty. Yes, we need help. But I also want you back in our lives. I miss you, Dad. I really do. You know what the saddest part of this whole thing is? I looked at her, feeling a strange emptiness inside. That I believe you. I believe you miss me. I believe you're sorry. But I also believe that if you were doing well, if you hadn't lost your home and found yourself in a difficult situation, you would never have come to me. Never would have told me you missed me. She opened her mouth to object, but then closed it and lowered her eyes. Maybe you're right, she said quietly. Maybe it took a stroke of fate to make me realize what I'd done. But doesn't that prove that I've changed? That I have realized my mistakes? No, Frances, I shook my head. It only proves that you're desperate, that you need help, and maybe you do regret what you did. But not because it was wrong, but because it backfired on yourself. What can I do to prove to you that it wasn't? Tears glistened in her eyes. Nothing, I answered simply, because it's not about proof, it's about trust, and that's gone. We sat in silence, sipping our cold drinks. People were walking by the window, going about their business, unaware of the drama unfolding behind the cafe's glass. I heard you won the lawsuit, Frances finally said, that you were getting your money back. Yes, part of it, I nodded. Not all of it, but a substantial amount. What do you plan to do with it? This is it, I thought, the real reason for her visit. To buy a house, I answered. Small, but comfortable. Maybe in the same neighborhood where your mother and I lived. What about us? She hesitated, but decided to ask. Could you help us get back on our feet? Not for Noel or me, for the kids. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to find some of the feeling that had made me rush to her aid before, but there was none, only fatigue and disappointment. No, Frances, I said at last. I will not help you with money, never again. Why not? There was a note of despair in her voice. We're family. No, I shook my head. We were a family, but you ruined it, with your hands, your decisions, and I don't believe it can be rebuilt. But the children, it's not their fault. Not their fault? I grinned bitterly. They laughed at me when you threw me out of the house. They called me a senile old man and a burden. They're your children, Frances. You raised them, and they're just like you. She lowered her head, unable to find the words to object. I'm sorry, she said at last. I know we don't deserve your help, but I was hoping. For what? I looked at her with genuine interest. That my fatherly feelings would override my common sense? That I'd let you use me again? No, Frances, I'm too old for that, and too smart. She got up to leave. So this is the end? She asked, and there was real pain in her voice. You're cutting us out of your life? Not me, I answered quietly. You did it when you kicked me out the door and told me you didn't need me anymore. I just accepted your decision. She didn't say anything, just nodded and walked out of the cafe without looking back. I sat there for a while, staring at my unfinished coffee and thinking about what had happened. Strangely, I felt no gloating or satisfaction, just a quiet confidence that I'd done the right thing, that I had finally learned to value myself more than those who had hurt me. I received my compensation a month after the trial. As Edwin had predicted, It wasn't the full amount, but enough to buy a small but cozy house in a nice neighborhood in Portsmouth. A two-story cottage with a garden, not too far from the center, in a quiet neighborhood where mostly retired people like me lived. The move only took a day. I didn't have much stuff. Walter helped, and then we had a little housewarming party, just the two of us. We sat on the veranda, sipped whiskey, and talked about life, the past, the future. "You know, Alfred," Walter said, looking at the amber liquid in the glass, "I'm proud of you. Not everyone could have made such a to rebuild at our age. Find the strength to start over." "I didn't have a choice," I shrugged. "Either start over or give up, and I've never been one to give up." "So what now? What's the plan?" I've been thinking. My plans used to revolve around my family, my daughter, my grandchildren. Now I was free of those obligations, free to live for myself. "I'll travel," I said at last. "I always wanted to see Rome, Venice, Paris." Elizabeth dreamed of it, but we kept putting it off. And then, it was gone. "That's a good idea," Walter nodded. "Maybe I'll go for a ride with you. I've always wanted to see the world." "I'd love the company," I smiled. "And, I want to do some charity work. There's an orphanage near here. I thought maybe I could help. With money or, just being around. Read books, play chess. Kids need grandfathers, even if they're not family." "It's worthy." Walter raised his glass. "To a new life, Alfred. May it be long and happy." "To new life." I clinked my glass with his and took a sip. It's been 6 months since that day. I did go to Italy. Rome and Florence enchanted me with their ancient beauty. Then there was France, Spain, Greece. I traveled light, stayed in small family-run hotels, wandered the narrow streets of old towns, and felt free. For the first time in years, I was living for myself, not looking back at other people's expectations and needs. Back in Portsmouth, I began to visit the local orphanage on a regular basis. At first just bringing books and toys, then I began to linger, reading stories to the children and playing board games with them. Gradually I became Grandpa Alfred for them, not a relative, but close. Someone who will always listen, help, support. Someone who would never betray. I heard little about Frances and her family. Walter occasionally brought news. Noel lost his business, took a job at a car wash. Frances had been fired from the clinic and was moonlighting as a cleaner. Clive dropped out of school for good, got involved with a bad company. Hazel, the only one of the group, seemed to have taken the plunge. She got a job in a supermarket and was studying at night. I listened to the news with sympathy, but with no desire to intervene. They had made their choices, now they were living with the consequences. And so was I. Sometimes, sitting in my garden in the evening and looking up at the stars, I thought about how strange things had turned out. Lost illusions but gained clarity. Lost the past but gained the future. And you know what? I had no regrets. Not buying that ill-fated house, not betraying Frances, not turning my back on them. Each of those steps led me to where I am now. A quiet, dignified life filled with meaning and joy. Family is not just about blood ties. It is respect, trust, love. And if blood relatives are not capable of that, then they are not family. They're just people you happen to be genetically linked to. My real family was Walter, the kids at the orphanage, the neighbors we had weekend barbecues with, the bridge club members I spent evenings with over cards and conversation. People who appreciated me for who I was, not for what I could give them. One day, on my way back from the store, I saw Frances on the opposite side of the street. She noticed me, stopped, as if she wanted to approach me. I nodded at her. No anger, no offense, just a sign that I saw her. She hesitated a moment, then nodded back and moved on. That silent exchange of nods was our last conversation. I wasn't looking to see her or any of her family, and they seemed to have finally realized there was nothing more to expect from me. And that was the right thing to do. Sometimes, in order to move forward, you have to leave the past behind. even if that past is your own flesh and blood. I learned to live for myself. I learned to appreciate every day, every moment. I learned to find joy in the little things, a cup of morning coffee, roses blooming in the garden, the laughter of the children at the orphanage, long conversations with Walter. And you know what? I was happy, really happy, maybe for the first time in years. Who would have thought that betraying my daughter would eventually lead me to happiness? Life really is full of irony, and lessons we're not always ready to hear. But I have heard them, and I'm grateful for it. Even if the path to that realization was painful and difficult. I am Alfred Hampton, 75 years old, and I am finally living the life I was always meant to live, with dignity, with joy, with love for myself and the world around me, without illusions, without false obligations, without those who saw in me only a source of money and comfort. And you know what? It's a beautiful life. It really is.